Welcome everyone to episode 3 of this podcast series. In this episode, Mrs S talks about something really close to my heart, very much about how do we take some of the values and the principles and not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. How do we model the model within our organisational fabric? How do we think about, how do we infuse and embody and live those values in action? So Mrs S talks to us about some of those aspects, but also starts to give a glimpse about the history and the evolution of DDP and how her journey with Dan Hughes and how DDP has come to be such a core part of Morehouse. I hope that you enjoy. I know that there's been lots of different guiding principles and values and ways of being, and some of that, I guess, has been really intuitive, and some of that has been just a feeling that you came to it, that you've been shaped. But I'm also mindful that through the journey and the growth, Morehouse has sort of developed a shared language and a model. So I just wondered if, for people who aren't familiar, if you could just give a sense of some of those core values and the model that is really important and central to Morehouse.
I think we've gone from having so many values that we were trying to articulate, and over time we've engaged in an exercise with staff and children, trying to get the community to identify what values we would all agree are evident in what we're doing. And we came to the situation where we've accepted that our values that we are articulating are acceptance, innovation, resilience, which is important, empowerment, and responsiveness. Although I think in conversations and what we do, people would recognise and describe other values, but in order for us to try and be explicit about what some of our core values were, I think as a community we came to the agreement that those were the ones that we wanted to be identified with.
So just to give, and it's tricky when people ask me this question, I'm like, it's huge. How can you ask me to condense it? But I just wondered if you could go through those few of innovation and resilience and just give a sense of why that was important, or what that means or looks like to Morehouse or to you.
Yes, I think exactly as you were suggesting, it's more than words. And so I think acceptance came out as the first, the top value that we all agreed was important. And I think, as I've said earlier in other podcasts, just acceptance of each other, acceptance of the children where they're at the time that we meet them, and acceptance of the family. So not having a prejudged measurement of what we find is what's acceptable, but starting from where children and families are at and accepting that in a non-judgmental way. And I think that's probably the strongest and most important starting point for us. And it's not necessarily something that's easy for staff, because I think as human beings, we can have prejudices and we can have views, but we need to be open and honest and have conversations about that. So for me, acceptance is probably a very important part of our culture and values that we would want to protect. Innovation, for me, is probably a description of the journey that we've been on. And what I mean by that is that when we have identified either an individual child or a group of children that we're working with, when we've recognized that either a service or an approach is not available to them externally, we would in the organisation have conversations about if that's a need and there isn't someone else or an organisation, a local authority or a service that is providing for that need and servicing that need. For us, it's about having an innovatory conversation. What's needed and can we meet that need? And what will that look like if we're trying to create a response to that need? So for me, that's where the innovation part comes from. I think resilience is probably one of the most fundamental, important measures that we can have in terms of staff, because our journey and our work can be challenging. It can be challenging physically and emotionally, and it can challenge who we are at our own core. And so it's about being able to have stickability and find resilience to support us through what can be quite difficult times, and being steadfast when children hit a crisis point, or when, for staff, they don't feel that they're getting very far or that they don't have answers. So resilience is a very important value that, again, we have to keep checking. Are we being resilient? Are we looking after ourselves in a way that we have the energy when the going gets tough? So for me, resilience is important. Empowerment, again, an important value, both for children and for staff. And I think certainly within the sector, within childcare and education now, there is a recognition that it's important to empower children and families to hear their voice and to hear them being able to articulate their needs, and to make sure that it's not imposed on children and families. We need to be listening, and we need to provide an environment and an experience that allows children and their families and our colleagues to feel that they have the ability to be listened to and that their opinion will be valued. We may not agree, but it's enabling people to have the power within themselves to express themselves, and for us all as a community to feel that we're being heard, even if what we feel or say, our opinion at that point in time, may not carry the weight that we're hoping for. I think it's important that children and adults have a sense of their own power and that they can be heard. And I think that, thankfully, services and approaches that are taking place within our sector are listening and creating responsive services. And I think an example of that is when we are setting our stall out and saying, if we're going to be working with children who have experienced trauma and who have these needs, we need to develop expertise, we need to develop skill, and we need to be open to continuous learning. And so, again, it's providing an environment where staff feel that they can express what their needs are in order to get support to be skilled up to do their job. And again, the final one that probably is an important one is responsiveness. And again, it's a thread throughout our organisation and our journey. And it's about making sure that we're hearing what the needs are, we're recognising the implications of meeting those needs, and that we are responding to them. And I think that goes beyond theoretical knowledge and skill that we need to continually develop. I think it also is a recognition that we need to continue improving the quality of our services, and that we are meeting current needs, and that we are being probably innovatory and current in constantly listening to research, constantly listening to people that have been in care and education, and learning from their experiences, and responding and creating needs-led services that are improving day on day, so that the outcome for children and for their families is an improvement in their lives, and a satisfactory journey that takes them into adulthood with lots of happy memories, rather than disappointments and a feeling that we have failed them. So it's important that we respond to research, to the environment, to the voices of children, adults, and our colleagues.
Yeah, no, I so appreciate you saying those, because it's hard to do and in a sequential way. And as you said, there's other ones that you would add, but at those core, it's so important, isn't it, to have some sort of anchors and a North Star, and different people coming from different experiences and disciplines and backgrounds, but to have some of the magic, what you do, and the theory and the concepts to be captured. And it's not necessarily about the words, but I think what you've done beautifully is sort of help us to think about some of the layers between that, and kind of what they mean and what they feel and how they're embodied. And as you said, I think something that's so beautiful about Morehouse, which we're going to have other conversations, is about the creativity and the innovation and thinking what's next, and also being really receptive and open and having humility. And I guess one of the approaches that I know really spoke to you and drew together some of your heart and your head and your experiences, alongside that there's other bits, was around DDP. For people who haven't heard of that, that stands for Dyadic Developmental Psychotherapy if you're doing it therapeutically, or practice if you're doing it in practice. Many people might be aware of the attitude and way of being, PACE, playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy, started with Dan Hughes and Jonathan Balin. And I know that DDP, you've had a relationship and a journey with DDP and with Dan, and traveling to America. So I wonder if you could sort of tell us a little bit about how that fit for you, what it was that resonated, and where it started, and how it's evolved.
Yes. I think when I first opened the school, I would have struggled to articulate a theoretical model that I was basing the school on. But in the early days, I tried to model what I would have described as the attachment theory and relational practice. But because I am the age I am, and having done social work, the theoretical models that impressed me were John Bowlby, Ainsworth, and they all made sense to me through my social work training. And so when I started the school, it was as basic as that. It was about nurture, respect, dignity, it was about recognizing, without being able to necessarily articulate it in a way that we now can. It made sense to me, as I say, the attachment model and relational practice. But what I've recognized at that point in time, it was just me. And so although I was modeling an approach to working with children, I recognized that although we had the core values and the right people, I felt at that time, I was struggling to find a model that I could train staff in, that they would understand some of what I was trying to model with them. And I came across some reading, and as you say, Dr. Dan Hughes, and I thought a lot of what he was saying made sense to me. And so I thought, right, I'm going to research this. So it sounds a bit pretentious, but I went over to New York and signed up for Dan's level 1 DDP. And at that time it was a 5-day course. So I stayed in New York for a week. And somebody had switched the light on. Everything that I was hearing, the theoretical explanation, the practice, it clicked. And I knew for me that was a theoretical model that I could take back to the school, and that I could help staff understand and develop skills in what I felt was the most important elements of what we do in the 24-hour curriculum. So I came back and I thought, well, that's great. I've spent a week with Dan, and I've just become so enthused and excited by what I heard. What can I do to make sure that I can get support to embed this in the organisation? So I was so fortunate, I managed to be introduced to Edwina Grant, who at that time was, I think, a director with Dan Hughes' DDP organisation in Scotland. And I started having conversations with Edwina. And we were so fortunate, because at that point there was a conversation between Dan and Edwina to try and start to get organisations involved in the accreditation process. So that excited me. This is great. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it well, and we're going to have external scrutiny on ourselves to make sure that, again, it's not lip service, and that the quality of what we're able to offer staff in terms of training would skill them up to do the job. So we identified one of our staff, who is in fact our CEO now, Stephen Drysdale. And Stephen, along with Edwina, helped us look at all of our processes. And what we needed to make sure, and it made sense, was that, again, that what we were doing, our processes, our policies, our procedures, our culture, all fitted into the principles of dyadic development psychotherapy. And so we were on a journey. And through time, with support from Edwina and Dan, we were able to make sure that when we worked through all of our core elements as an organisation, that again, what was on the tin was in the tin, that we weren't using the language of DDP without children and staff experiencing DDP through the whole core roots of the organisation. And that wasn't an easy journey because you can describe and articulate a theory, and you can train staff on a particular theory. But you need to make sure that you're continually checking, are you using the appropriate language? Are staff using the skills? Are children experiencing what we are saying that our model is? And that's, again, a continual journey that we're on today. And I think that I'm very proud that we were one of the first organisations to not say that we were using DDP, but we're actually living the theoretical perspective of DDP. And that's grown to now be in the position where we're one of the organisations that offers DDP level 1 and 2, and it's open to any candidates in Scotland or organisations. They can come and do DDP training with us. And for me, I think that's important because as when you get to my age and you go around organisations, you can see their brochures saying, this is our theoretical approach. You go into the organisation and that's not necessarily what you experience. So for me, having DDP and offering it as training externally and being a core training element for all of our staff, not just our care staff, teaching, our housekeepers, all of the staff are trained in DDP so that they can understand what we're trying to do, what language is helpful and useful. And I think offering DDP externally is keeping us fresh and is making sure, again, that when people join us and visit us, they experience the qualities and the theoretical elements of dyadic developmental practice.
Yeah, I love so much of what you just said. And I think it's really interesting in terms of, firstly, that moment, and I've experienced this many times myself, where you're reading something or you go to a conference or you listen to a podcast and it's just, as you said, like a switch or a sparkle moment or a light bulb, and it just feels, I've got language or a philosophy or an ethos, and it just connects the dots and it just can feel so aligned. And I think but the fact that once again, you followed that and you went to America and was trying to find, if we're not just saying something, but we really want to find a way to articulate and connect and to have a shared language. And then, as you said, there's a lot of people, as we're going to talk even more about, but talking the talk, but not walking the walk, or putting something on the website. And this wasn't a one-off training. This has been a way of living, of breathing, of embodying. And as you said, an ongoing keeping fresh, practicing. Sometimes it won't happen. Sometimes it will be contaminated or polluted, but really finding a way to have integrity within it. And there's so much within that, as you said, of it wasn't just the interactions with the kids, but how is it infused into the policies and the procedures and the interactions and the investment in staff. You know, we know there's some people who go to a half an hour training and are like, but this has been a real commitment for people. And as you said, all staff, not just practitioners. And I know that you also are constantly looking for new models and approaches to enrich and to add that. But I think it's really powerful for people to have a sense of those core values and how DDP, being such a relational stance and one of curiosity and empathy and compassion and acceptance, has also really been the backbone and infused into the fabric. And still evolving. It's a comma, not a full stop. So I love that. around
I
that?
kind of feel that Dan created it for me. Even the language just made such sense. And as you say, it just joined the dots. And I think it would be wrong to suggest that that's the only approach and that we are welded to solely Dan's theory. I think that there are so many other elements that come from research and things that can complement DDP. But I think it's probably the most relational, attachment-based approach that makes sense to me. And I think the fact that it as a theory has evolved and is expanding and researching and becoming more informed and more advanced than when we even started.
Yeah, and being a trailblazer of that in Scotland and trying to use that to shift the landscape and to work with partners and to offer that is huge. And I think I'm sure Dan would adore to hear it say that it just spoke to you. It was like he wrote it for you. And I think it's like putting on lots of different pairs of shoes, isn't it? When you find one that you're like, oh, it's the perfect fit. It's just so wonderful and gorgeous. And it just doesn't jar in the same way. And because so much of what you were doing came from heart and intuition and love, it's beautiful when you have something that is kind of, connects the dots and is aligned. But also it's the both and, as you said, it's not saying we know that multi-layered situations require multi-layered approaches. So that is a approach and a philosophy, but you're still open and actively seeking other ways, whether that's sensory, whether that's neurosequential, whether that's, thinking about the body, that there's so many other ways to continue to sort of make it the innovation part of your values, making it the best that it can be and constantly being open to new perspectives. And as you said, the real world reality of sometimes we can know the theory, but infusing it into practice. So that ongoing checking in, are we getting it? Does it fit?
Yeah, very much so.
I feel like we've covered lots about values and DDP and the sort of model. Is there anything else that sort of you're feeling, I would have liked to say that about either DDP or the Morehouse model at this time?
I think that it's important that as an organisation we are living and we are a genuine example of what we say our practices. And I think that it's important that we keep refreshing ourselves and being reassured that we are current and that we are keeping abreast of the developments. And I think that, as you were saying a minute ago, Karen, you can offer training in DDP, but it has to go beyond that. It has to be a living experience for staff. And I think it's important that DDP is not just a one-off training, and that it has to have an impact on staff supervision, staff training. It has to have an impact on our assessment and evaluation of the work that we do. And so it's more than just a language. It should be, and certainly it's important, I think, to myself and senior managers, it's important that staff experience, feel, and understand the whole community uses DDP language, and the whole community understands, and that it's a humanistic approach. It's not a theory that we attach to how we work with children. It's a living theory that explains what may be behind the scenes with staff. I go back to what I said in one of the other podcasts. We can never assume that as adults and our colleagues standing beside us have been on the same journey and have finished their stage of development and insight as to their past and who they now are. I think it has to be that we acknowledge that adults also need to experience the theoretical language and approach that DDP brings. It's not just to be done to the children.
It's not an us and them, isn't it? There's something so powerful around. It's not just the words, but how they mirror into actions and how they go from being well-meaning to well-practicing. And I know that there's been such an emphasis on, actually how can that way of being, way of doing be embodied, be felt, and infused throughout all of those different bits. I wonder if you could just give us an example around, how it might be infused, whether that's, you mentioned supervision, assessment, recruitment, whichever one you want. If you could give an example of how your model or approach or DDP really also shapes and influences one of the bits of the organisational fabric as well.
Yeah. I think it's a challenge. I think that when you have an employer hat on, there may be situations that is brought to your decision making, and I've actually I have an example, and I have permission to share it. We had a staff member who was put in a very difficult position that we did not know at that given time, and something that she failed to do brought her to the disciplinary process. And in the disciplinary process, I took my eye off the ball, and I was looking at the process with the staff member and the final decision as an employer. And afterwards, it left me with a lot of concern and a lot of questions for myself. And the questions that I was asking was, where was the humanity in the process of that staff member? And where was the humanity in the decision that was taken, the disciplinary decision that was taken? And I couldn't reconcile that, and the staff member had left us. And the wonderful thing is that we got the opportunity because of the positive elements that had been in our relationship with that staff member prior to the disciplinary matter. She kept in contact with us, and I was able to have a conversation with senior managers, and I was able to say to the former staff member, we got it wrong. We did not recognize your humanity and your challenge, and we put you in the position where we made a judgment of you that was not fair. And she accepted our apology. She's now back in our organisation in a senior position, doing the most wonderful stuff for us. And for me, I think it was important. She constantly says she understands. She constantly says that she accepts our apology. But for me, it was a really important thing to have gone through. And it was really important that it brought us back to living our values and accepting we're not perfect, we make mistakes, but if we understand the children and we understand the families, we have to understand the vulnerability of staff. So it was a difficult experience for me. It was an emotionally painful and disappointing experience for me, personally being part of that. But I think it's been a wonderful learning journey, and it makes me pull up and stop and think at a deeper level than I may have done before.
I love everything about that, and I so appreciate you sharing that and naming that, but also for her to give permission for you, because I think that touches upon so many things of we are flawed, we are not superhuman, we are going to make mistakes, but the beauty which is aligned with the relational approach in DDP is the relational repair. It's what do we do after? How do we reflect and not react? How do we take our brains to the gym? And how do we have humility to be like, how might that have landed? Or are we living and breathing our values? Or was I talking the talk and not walking the walk? And I think I often say a quote of, we grow in reflection, not perfection. And I think that's such a beautiful example of something that could have been really thorny, really tricky. And also that it wasn't binary, it wasn't polarized. You looked at the both and that something painful happened, but you were able to do something reparative and live and breathe the values. And I think you just beautifully put so much that this isn't just over there, it's absolutely in all of those different layers and threads of the organizational fabric. So I think that's really kind of powerfully captured it. And I hope that speaks to people. It's in the emails we send, it's in, the team meetings and all of those bits. So I really, really appreciate you sharing that. So.
Thank you.